Hi, welcome back. It's time for us to talk finally about color. Everybody's had a favorite color ever since you were a little kid, and now it's time to really think a little more about it as a watercolorist. Understanding how color really works and how colors work together is what's going to really lead to success in your paintings. There are many color wheels, not unlike this, that are available on the market. Think about this as a watercolorist, and we're going to be using this color wheel to inform everything that we do about color with our paintings. The longer you work with watercolor, the more this will be kind of in your brain and you won't need to refer back to it. But I find it helpful to use this color wheel as a reference in a lot of different contexts as I'm working on a painting. A couple of quick things that you might already know is that the primary colors can be used to mix any other color. Basically, if you take your yellow and your red, you could mix them together to get your orange. Or you could take your blue and yellow and mix them together to create your green. Color that ends up on the opposite side of the color wheel, from the primaries, the blue, the red, and the yellow form that strong primary triangle. Once you create the secondary color of green, orange, and purple, you've showed where the complement is, and that's color that's straight across on the color wheel. So red's complement is green, blue's complement is orange, and purple's complement is yellow, just as yellow's complement is purple. So these go both directions. And what that tells me as an artist is that if I have a very orange kind of painting, it's a huge sky of sunset, that a little bit of blue is going to really pop. It's going to really jump out in that painting, and it's going to look good. Those colors tend to go together. It's why we have, red and green as Christmas colors or the holiday colors, is because they go well together, and it sort of defines that season in the winter. So you could go to an art store and buy literally hundreds of different colors, tubes of pigment that range anywhere from orange over to red. There'd probably be a dozen different tubes you could find that were somewhere in between those two. What I want to focus on in this course is the ways that you can mix the colors yourself to create things that are, to me, a lot more exciting than something that's come right out of the tube. I want to take a look at some crucial lessons about complementary colors and what you can and cannot do with watercolor. If I have blue and I put it right next to orange, that's going to be complementary. It's going to look good to people's eye. That's like a nice pairing. I'm going to leave a little bit of white paper space in between them so that they're not really touching. That looks pretty nice together. I just want to warn you and have you think about this for a second, that the pigment itself, when that blends together, it's going to lead to some results that you might not expect, and it might not be as beautiful as you think. The reason this looks good is there's integrity in that orange and there's integrity in that blue, and they really pop when they're juxtaposed next to each other. As soon as I blend them with my brush in some way, I'm going to create a different color. I'm going to create something that I might not expect. So let's take some of that orange and run that down into the blue. And it's going to run and charge that paint. It's going to create a brown, and it might be a beautiful, rich brown, but just be warned that it sometimes doesn't always look like what you expect. Let's try it again. If I take some red, I'm using cadmium red medium, and I'm just going to make a red field against a green one, and it should look pretty nice here. This is sap green. They complement each other. That could create a pretty beautiful painting if those were used together. But again, if they got blended together, it might not do exactly what you think it's going to do in terms of looking beautiful and bright. It's going to create a brown, or in this case, just sort of a muddy color. It looks like mud. I'm going to be a little bit cautious, therefore, whenever I blend colors, to think ahead about whether it's going to create something that I love. And I'll tell you what I've learned over the years is that complements tend to not be what I love when they're blended together immediately, but rather analogous colors. So rather than jumping across the color wheel, I want to go to the next door neighbor. I want to have my blending and charged color come from two colors on the color wheel that are next to each other, not across from each other. Let's see how that works. So I might start with that red, get a nice good blob of that going, but rather than jump across to the green, what if I take the analogous color or the next door color of orange and let that charge together with the red? You're going to find a pretty beautiful blending that starts to happen with this. What if I kept going around the wheel? The next analogous color to those is going to be my yellow. I'm going to use Cad Yellow Lemon, which is one of the lightest yellows I could get. And I'm going to put that right here and let that orange bleed into it and charge over there. This is a little analogous part of the color wheel. It's part of the spectrum. It creates a rainbow on my paper. And if I keep one thing in my brain as I'm working on paintings, because there's so many things I try to keep in my brain, but in terms of color, I think about using that spectrum. I try to create rainbows in a way. So I'm going to encourage you now to take some small pieces of watercolor paper and create some little spectrums for yourself. Paint some rainbows. I would stick with just 3 of the main colors of the color wheel. They don't have to be the 3 basic shades. You can certainly experiment with what sorts of green you might use or what sort of blue you might use. Find combinations that you love and see if you can create some little rainbows or little spectrums that go from one analogous color to another. So I'm now going from blue over to green, but I'm going to use a more of a viridian kind of green and see how that charges together there. And from there, I would go to my yellow. That looks pretty spring-like. That I might label this then, so that when I keep this next to my desk, I know that I used cerulean blue, I used viridian for my green, I used Cad Lemon Yellow for my yellow. And after that dries and I really study the way that the grains moved, the way that the charging occurred on the watercolor paper, I might find that I really love how that worked. And that's what I'm going to try to incorporate in my painting next time. Maybe I'll have my trees blend across that spectrum. And that's going to create not necessarily the most realistic forest in the world, but something gorgeous. And that's what I'm looking for. So once I develop a sort of analogous spectrum like this, 3 colors that I think blend together well, charge together well, create some interesting combinations and textures and fairly beautiful flow, I might translate that into a painting by pinning that beside my desk and keeping it in mind as I complete a painting. Might not be a forest that you would ever see in real life and in the real world, but it does provide a kind of magical mystery tour of the forest that we can really enjoy and hope our viewers can enjoy as well. One thing you will hear me talking about during these videos with color is that we need to put a warm color or a cool color in here or there. What I'm really talking about is if we divide the color wheel in half this way, yellow, orange, and red are usually considered the warm colors, and green, blue, and purple, and all the variations in between these are the cool. So when we think about warm versus cool colors, the temperature of the colors, it's really about how those make the viewer feel, in a sense. Certainly these 3, this half of the color wheel would tend to be a warmer, more summery, kind of sunny landscape, and these would tend to be more wintry, cooler landscape. Not necessarily a really cool painting, but it's how it makes the viewer feel. I like to try to balance a little bit in a painting. Many of my paintings are quite cool in terms of the overall color palette, but if that's the case, I would still want some warmth somewhere in that painting usually. This one I've just been working on is a really super heavy, cool surrounding, maybe just a third or tinier than that, a fifth of the overall painting, and that little pop of warm color that I'm going to try to do quite a bit of work of drawing my viewer into that landscape. Out of the infinite number of colors there are in the real spectrum, my little paint box has boiled it down to 24 little sections, and therefore I have room for 24 pigments. And you might think that that means that I'm limited in what I can do in terms of painting a beautiful painting full of color. It might make you want to rush out to the art store or the art supply catalog and start buying hundreds of different tubes of different colors. And I'm going to encourage you to start with less and learn how to make them them blend together. Learn what you can make with those colors. I've got two different kinds of yellow, for example. One is a lemon yellow and one is an aerolite yellow, which I'm going to show you now. Aerolite is like a medium yellow, I would call it. I love it. It's a beautiful color. But in nature, I might never see that color, and I want to make it more subtle, let's say. I want to push that towards a more pastel-y or subtle kind of color, and I'm going to add titanium white to it. Now to do that, I'll make a puddle just like I have before, and I'm going to get some titanium white going, which you can't really see, but I've made a little creamy consistency puddle of titanium white. Titanium white will help me make a tint of this yellow. Tints are where we add white and therefore make more of a pastel-y kind of color. Let's look at the comparison of the aerolite yellow right out of the tube, and then this is the tint of that, adding some titanium white. Of course, I could add more white and make a lighter tint, and you've got total control over this. I hope you'll experiment. This is just a fun thing to really play around with. Let your little experiments dry, and then you'll suddenly have a whole little deck of cards to look at. Find that color that you really want to use. A tint means adding white, and you can do it with any color. Let's take my cadmium red. Now, this is the only red I really have in my arsenal right here, and you might think that really limits me. One of my favorite colors. Well, not really, because I can adjust it by adding any other color to it, and I can certainly make a tint by adding some titanium white to it. So let's do that right now. I'm going to get my brush clean. Dirty bucket first, clean bucket second. Try to remember that. And I sometimes do. Okay, but now if I take a look at that shade that I created with my red, it looks pastel-y, it leans towards pink, obviously, and I'm going to put it right next to my cad red right out of the tube here, so you can see how much difference there is with that tint. White tends to make your color a little bit warmer, a little more pastel-like. Let's see what happens if we do this with a blue. I'm going to use our old favorite ultramarine here and see what happens if we make a tint of that. Here's the original blue, ultramarine blue. I'm going to rinse, go to my puddle of titanium white here. So that might kind of start reminding you of some of the blues that you can buy in the store, like periwinkle or lighter blues. You can create your own. Use some titanium white and get yourself some tints going. I want to talk a little bit about green, because green is, of course, what we think of when we think of nature, the color of foliage and trees and yay, nature, grass. Sap green looks like this right out of the tube. I have two greens in my palette. I use sap green and olive green. And here's olive. If you paint with greens right out of the tube, I have a feeling you're going to be disappointed in the realism of your painting. You're going to be disappointed in trying to make a beautiful landscape based on your love of nature and how beautiful nature is, and then suddenly the greens look like they're right out of the tube. It can look so fake. Your job is to really play around with those greens and get it to a place where it looks like you want it to look, and you're the one that's in control. I'm going to first make a tint out of that sap green, and let's see how that looks on our paper. And I'm going to do the same thing with olive. It'll be a subtle difference, but let's see if we can tell the difference between the olive green shade and the sap green shade. Looks like there's a little bit more yellow in it, and it will lend itself to different uses in your paintings that you've decided on. You get to be the boss of this. But I'm only giving you just a really basic teaser on this so that you'll go to your own paint box, whatever colors you have, and make the best of it. Not only make the best of it, but have a lot of fun with it and find some intriguing, beautiful things that you will love to use in your paintings. If we want one of our colors to lean darker rather than lighter by tinting it, we'll need to make a shade, which traditionally means that we add black to that color. Well, I don't know if you can see it, and probably it's a little hard to tell, but out of my daily palette here, I don't have any black. That's because in my curmudgeonly style, I have certain things I love and don't love about making shades. And I'm going to take some lamp black and put it on my ceramic plate since it's not in my palette. I've found that I like making shades in different ways than just using black, but let's see what happens when we do. Let's go back to that aerolite yellow that we started started with on our tint and remind ourselves what that looks like. Nice rich color. Woo. Man, I love that. Now let's go to our plate and get a little bit of this lamp black. A little goes a long way with black, I'll tell you that. Really, my bias is just that I really want to encourage you to make really rich, dark colors rather than relying on black, which tends to sort of flatten out in a painting. That's why I love to find other combinations to make my dark shadows or to make a dark tree trunk or something like that. Let's go back to that aerolide and let's see what that looks like. What happens if we try our CAD red again? Let's put that one down here so we can make a shade of it, which will be a lot darker. I typically, what I would do if I were to make a darker shade of red, I would use some purple. But let's just do the traditional thing here and try some lamp black on that red. Make a little more puddle of lamp black here. Then I'm going to clean up a little bit before I dip into my red so I don't totally mess up my palette. Now I'm going back over here and let's get a shade of red. It is leaning towards purple. If you were to go to an art store and buy that color, it could be maybe like a alizarin crimson, which is a color I love. But rather than just buy the tube of it, you could develop your own using a CAD red and some black. What happens to our blues if we make a darker shade? Here's our ultramarine. Okay, clean up a little before I hit my palette with this flat 1-inch brush. Take some ultramarine and get some of that black into it. Ooh, we're getting towards that night sky. You can, of course, buy a color called indigo or even Prussian blue, which has a little more green in it, that would look something like this. But you're going to want to play around with shading and using a little touch of black to make those colors really, really darken in a rich way. I wanted to save its own sheet for messing around with some green shades because, of course, it's that color of nature that is so important in making our landscape paintings. We didn't really make a shade at all yet, but let's give that a try. And I wanted to leave enough room and time to talk a little bit about the greens that I use in my paintings. Let's start with sap green again. And here's what it looks like. Beautiful dark green. Now I'm touching a little bit of lamp black to make our shade puddle, and sap green with a little lamp black. Okay, let's label that so we don't get mixed up here. And let's do the same thing with olive green. It's got more yellow in it. If on the color wheel, this would be a little farther around the circle towards the yellow, away from the blue. And if I get a shade of it, let's see what we get. Got a little bit of streak of black in there, but it gives you a sense of it. So that's olive. Now, those will make some interesting, beautiful, I think realistic even, shades of what a forest might look like for your paintings. But I want to put aside the lamp black for a minute and tell you why, for one thing, I don't have black in my palette, so how do I do all these dark green forests that I paint? Well, let's just do a couple of my favorites here. First thing I want you to think about is that green really comes from, on our color wheel, it comes from blue and yellow. And all these colors have a varying amounts of those original primaries, blue, yellow, or red. I'm going to take a blue that I love, which is Prussian blue, and I'm just going to put a spot of that on the paper. There's some Prussian blue, and I want to show you what happens if you put a brown with it. So I'm going to use some raw sienna first, and just let the raw sienna mix with that Prussian blue right on the paper. And that's going to create a green. It doesn't look like a green that's right out of the tube at all, but it's still a beautiful sort of natural earth kind of color. So this is Prussian and this is raw sienna. Another favorite of mine is to have even a darker brown. So for super dark shadows in a forest, I would take some of that, this is a really dark chunk of Prussian blue, and I would grab some sepia, a darker brown than that raw sienna, and let that mix with my Prussian blue, and I'm going to get a really dark, beautiful, rich green. It makes some beautiful, glistening kind of color that you can add to your painting. So let's remind ourselves that that was sepia added to Prussian. We'll show that those are both Prussian, and this one's raw sienna. I mainly want to encourage you to experiment and take whatever paints you have. Don't have to go to the catalog and buy a bunch of more tubes. You need to play with what you have and see how they go together. See if you can find colors that you love by mixing. Now we've talked a lot about color and how it works. Let's move to texture. See you on the next lesson. Hi, I'm Bob. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you'll go by my website at watercolorwithbob.com. That's where you'll find an interactive outline of the whole course. You can also share your work with me and your fellow students. One thing I really love about watercolor is how accessible it is. That's why I realized it was important to me to put this course out for free. That said, it would mean the world to me if you would support this work. You can like it, you could share it with your friends, you could subscribe to the channel, you could also visit the gift shop or even make a donation. Thanks so much. See you on the next lesson, and happy painting. Watercolorists are going to bring about a new world order.